You know, being a victim of emotional incest can leave one with a shattered identity. All forms of abuse can leave somebody with a shattered identity, but today I want to zero in on emotional incest in terms of specifically how that affects one's identity development and can shatter it. Now, that's a pretty heavy duty statement right there, a shattered identity. But it's exactly what can happen when a child is emotionally taken over to benefit the parent's needs. When you grow up without a sense of self, then there is no self there, right? If there's no self there, then what is there? How do you even define it? What's a kid or an adolescent grasping onto? There's nothing really to grasp onto if there is no core self. Now, by core self, of course, that's when a child is getting to know what they're all about. There's some ego strength there. They like themselves enough to advocate for themselves. They have a voice. They can stand up for themselves if they need to. They're still learning, of course, like any other kid, but there's a them there. There's something there. There's a core. And that even allows a kid to self-soothe if things are really toxic or emotionally chaotic at home. And that continues into our adulthood by self-soothing. That could be a variety of things. That's just knowing how to caretake or love ourselves enough. So what does that mean? Well, it means different things to different people. Maybe it's a good book with a cup of tea. Maybe it's a long walk doing some meditating out in the forest. Maybe it's just some alone time somehow. But all these things I just mentioned involve the fact that you have a self to, in fact, soothe. So when a kid's identity has been wiped away, they don't even know what that necessarily means. And it may scare them to think about soothing their self because then they're alone with themselves. They're alone with their thoughts. They're alone with their feelings. They don't want to feel this stuff. It could be guilt or anger or shame or rage towards the parent who took them over, or confusion around sexual identity, just simply turning into an adolescent, going from a boy to a man, a girl to a woman. So if the identity has been shattered enough and one can't self-soothe, then there may be additional symptoms as the child or adolescent or adult is now trying to cope with or cover up those core symptoms that I just described. So now they may be in such a state of confusion so much and anxiety and dread that they may be having some OCD-ish kind of traits. Or they notice they're turning to drugs or alcohol. They have to self-soothe that way. Well, that's not a healthy way to self-soothe. But in one's mind, it may seem like, well, it's self-soothing. It's better than just staying here in these raw feelings that seem just so out of control and it's hard to tolerate them. They seem so powerful. So I'll self-soothe through getting hooked on prescription meds. So who is one self-soothing if their identity has been shattered? When you're not able to be comfortable in your own skin, when you can't identify feelings, when you can't be authentic to anybody, especially important people in your life, when you're always wearing a facade, putting on a mask, always walking on eggshells at home, always in a bit of fear, there's always some anxiety there, there's always something a little off, you can't relax. You're always thinking ahead to be in performance mode. That takes an enormous toll on a child. And that's a result of being a victim of emotional incest. Sometimes kids grow up over-intellectualizing, overthinking everything as a way to cope because the feelings are too scary. And we can get caught in ruminations. I know I had that as an issue in my childhood growing up for sure. I always went to my mind as a way to cope. And so it'd be a hamster wheel on and on and on up here. Overthinking and then thinking about thinking. I had to be locked up here because facing and dealing with my feelings was just way too scary. I didn't make any progress on that until I began my own personal therapy. Without a healthy sense of identity, we don't feel like we belong anywhere. Belonging is huge. When you don't feel like you belong, you're not a part of your own family. And then that usually transfers, because you can't be authentic, to not belonging to your group of friends. You can put on a good act perhaps and be friendly and outgoing and even charismatic. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about authentic connection where you can really be yourself and speak the truth about your life. Usually victims of emotional incest grow up with a great distrust of others' ability to provide them love. Because the love seems like it must be like what they went through in childhood, that they were taken over, they were smothered. So now they're falling in love and they're 22 years old. And there's probably going to be some fear around that because they want to fall in love. There's some mixed feelings, maybe an inner conflict, because now this person that they're starting to fall for, they may smother them. Those are the thoughts in somebody who's a victim of emotional incest. This is what was role modeled for them. This is what they had to live through. There's a lot of landmines out there in terms of relationship issues because there's no skills there because the child wasn't helped with these issues growing up. They were too busy having to mirror back to the perpetrating parent what the parent wants, what the parent's needs are. In meeting new friends or beginning a romantic relationship, is there perhaps a thought, a belief that you may be abandoned? Somehow you're not good enough because you really weren't good enough for your parent because your parents wanted you to be what they wanted you to be, not who you really are. So maybe you're thinking that's going to happen with some friends or a lover. If you struggle with yourself, which of course would be an issue for somebody who has a shattered identity, then you're going to struggle with the other selves out there, with the other people, with other relationships. You're going to struggle with that because you're still struggling with your own relationship with yourself. So if you're dealing with this in your life, one thing you can do is begin recognizing patterns. What happens to you? How do you just disappear or turn into a wallflower or a chameleon or become very codependent? What happens? Be aware of it. Name it. What are you afraid of at that moment? It'll also be important to begin practicing communication in very authentic, honest ways. Some people call it radical honesty. Because the pendulum's been way over here all through your childhood, right? Where you had the lie. And now in an effort to bring it back to where you can begin practicing new, healthier skills, you may need to bring the pendulum way over here where it's all true. So in a way, you're practicing radical honesty. And also look at all your triggers. You can learn so much from your triggers. What caused you to want to hide at that moment with this person, emotionally hide? What caused you to have some anger at that person? Why are you so down in the dumps after this great evening you just had out? Well, what's that about? Did it feel like maybe it was great on the outside, but inside you didn't really connect with anybody? You couldn't be yourself? That would be a trigger. So triggers are an important thing to pay attention to. For me, it was presenting a lot at night during sleep. Sometimes people can be afraid to go to sleep or maybe even have nocturnal panic attacks. Because when you think about sleeping, there's something you're giving up. You're surrendering, right? You're just nodding off into Never Never Land and you're trusting that everything's gonna be okay. Well, if you were a kid that could never really trust much of anything, you always had to be on, looking behind your back, performing, anticipating, then it's hard to perhaps sleep. Because sleep requires that you give up control. And control is a big one for people who have shattered identities. They want to be in control as much as they can because it's a way to work with the sense that there's no self there. So for people who have any type of issue around sleep and you're not sure where it's coming from, look at your childhood. Are you a victim of some kind of abuse? Falling asleep or just trusting that everything is going to happen the way it needs to? Our heart is going to keep beating on its own? Blood is going to keep circulating on its own? Well, who's doing that? What's doing that? So if a kid grows up not trusting, they may have a hard time trusting that everything will be fine while they are sleeping. And especially for somebody who's a victim of, let's say, sexual or physical abuse, they may be afraid to fall asleep because somebody used to come in the room and abuse them, perhaps. So once again, it applies to all sorts of abuse, but today I've zeroed in on emotional incest. And once that is set in stone at an early age, it continues all through childhood. And the result is the child ends up with shattered identity development. So there's a lot of hope here though with some therapy and looking inward and discovering, peeling away the layers of the onion of our childhood developmental years, looking at the underlying issues, what really happened. Then we can begin to heal and make progress in our life and repair, put back those pieces of a shattered identity. So please leave me some comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Please subscribe to my mental health YouTube channel if you like these kind of videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.